Hello, sweet grievers. Mandy here. Restorative Grief is all about creating easy access to healing, no matter where or who you are. That's why I want you to remember that if you want grief support beyond a podcast, then perhaps it's time to consider a one on one coaching connection. You don't have to implement all these grief strategies alone, you know? Use the link in the show notes to learn more at mandykpart.com/coaching or reach out to me on social media because I'm here for you, okay? Now let's get on to this week's episode. Welcome back to Restorative Grief with Mandy Capehart. You are listening to episode 125, titled Finding Our Flow of Strength with Aundi Kolber. When you have lived through trauma and loss, the sensations of pain and tension are often so commonplace you expect them to continue in every new relationship or situation. My guest this week is author and licensed professional counselor Aundi Kolber, who found a way forward after a completely normalized childhood of trauma and abuse. Her latest book is an integrative approach to human flourishing on the other side of loss and trauma, but she's also just a beautiful human with a heart for you to heal. So let's get into the healing, shall we? Record. Welcome back to Restorative Grief with Mandy Capehart. I'm Mandy, of course, and today I am really excited. I have the honor of bringing one of my favorite authors on the subject of healing and trauma to the show. Aundi Kolber is a trauma therapist, author of Try Softer, a fresh approach to move us from anxiety, stress, and survival mode into a life of connection and joy. So, of course, when I first found your work, that was like, all of the beautiful words. I agree with them. And your most recent book is Strong Like Water, Finding Freedom, Safety, and Compassion to Move Through Hard Things and Experience True Flourishing. So if any of you listening hear all of those favorite words of mine that I use all the time, I think you can understand why her work is so meaningful. But I'm just really excited to get a bigger glimpse into this beautiful, tender-hearted person behind these works. And so without any more waiting, Aundi, thank you for being on the show.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. It's good to be with you.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean it when I say you are probably one of my favorite authors on the topic. And I think that it's because your life experience, your story, and the way that you show up first for yourself and then with invitation, not just psychoeducation to everyone around you, is the really big part of how we turn all of this knowledge and all of our life experience into this catalyst moment for transformation and human flourishing. So, without, of course, going too far into it, tell us a little bit about how you decided, oh, this is the better way.
Mm, mm. Well, thank you so much for those kind words. I mean, that means a lot to me to hear and really is an honor. Um, yeah, it's been just a quite an interesting journey for me. I mean, I think just a big overview. So I'm a licensed professional counselor. I've been doing this work, gosh, almost 20 years at this point. And part of my story is that I am a survivor of complex trauma from my childhood. And I think um, big picture of that is to say, my experience of trauma was so normal that I didn't know it was trauma to the level. I just thought that my family was a little bit different than other people's. And I thought that, yeah, I mean, there were definitely, it wasn't like I didn't know anything, but it was a sense of just having no idea how normalized my experience, like for my own self, that it was so normal that there was never a before for me. And so as I got older and I began to have just some sense of like some pain and woundedness, like becoming more clear, like not that it wasn't there, but I had more clarity. I was drawn to wanting to become a counselor. And when I started to do that work, there was part of the invitation there was to do, some of my own therapy and do that type of going deeper into my story. And so as I became a therapist and was doing that work, it was like these different layers started to come off. And one of the first layers is that so much of what I was learning was very much rooted in things like facts and information. And I was always really good at, I've always been a pretty articulate person. And I think that sometimes caused people to think that I was doing better than I actually was because I
Yeah.
could talk about it. The problem was that that was really disconnected from my body and my pain and and so much of my trauma. And so really about, I would say about, let's say 13 years ago, I started to have this sense of like, I have got to find a different way other than just talk therapy. And so I started to dive into, kind of specializing in trauma and EMDR and somatic therapy. And that really correlated also with a deepening of my own healing too. And
Yeah.
so there's just been this very reciprocal relationship around understanding that our change and our healing always has to go deeper than like a logical cognitive understanding. It's not that those things aren't helpful, it's just that they don't ultimately transform us. And so that has really, I would say, especially like the last, maybe 6 or 7 years as I've gotten into the writing sphere, so much of my focus is figuring out how to articulate and invite people into the work in a way that helps them access it from a more embodied way,
Yeah.
rather than just having it be another fact that they can remember.
Everybody take a deep breath. I think that that is so necessary because you're absolutely right. If we could think our way through this trauma, we would have. No one is sitting around saying, "Well, I just kind of like ruminating on these losses and this pain, so I'll just wait it out." And fortunately, your experience and your interest in the somatic approach and that really integrative approach has become more widespread too. And so we're seeing this conversation starting, which I mean, that's the whole thing behind my work as well, is we have to bring an integrative approach into our story. Otherwise, we leave part of ourselves behind. We miss
Yeah.
part of the healing that's available to us. So take me through what that started as. Like, what was your first step after deciding, okay, there's more to it, there's more available, but I'm terrified because talk therapy hasn't helped, maybe? I'm thinking of like people I've talked to who say talk therapy doesn't help, not in isolation. Where did you take people next? Because EMDR isn't always available to anyone, or it's terrifying, really, because
Yeah.
so exhausting.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's certainly like a whole there's a whole spectrum of I think preparation and resources and even just like attunement required in our journey as we are working, as we're kind of on the path towards healing. Um, and so I think for me, what's hard is that there were so many steps. And I say that to say one example to say that was pretty early on. Um, and what I always, the reason I say it like there's so many steps, it's not that that's bad, but it was never like there was one thing that was the silver bullet.
Sure.
That's the thing that I think I would say. But one of the stories I tell, like in Try Softer at the very beginning, and this was a moment that really did it shift something in me. At the time, I wasn't quite sure to what, but it started something. Is I had a supervisor because as a therapist, it's sort of like an apprenticeship work where you sort of work under someone as you get trained, which is wonderful. I think it's a really helpful part of training to be a therapist because there's so many things that you don't have any idea what to do. Like, or you heard about it in school, you don't know what that means in the therapy room. You need someone to help you find an embodied way to show up.
Yeah.
And so I had a supervisor named John, and John was one of, I think he was this really regulated, kind, grounded person in my life that I'm so grateful for because at this point, I mean, this was really before, like, we're hearing so much about neurobiology and stuff. which I love and I'm so grateful for. But at this time, that was really not very common. Even in like I had to go and find my own training to learn a lot about these concepts.
Mm.
And so I was really looking back, I'm like, oh, I was pretty like dysregulated at times. Um, and so I was in this time with John in supervision, and he says to me, I'm sharing with him about this case that I feel really overwhelmed by. Like I can just remember like my face is all hot and I feel this feeling of like responsibility and I'm gonna mess it up and I don't know what to do. And it was certainly not an easy case, but part of what was influencing my reaction was that I was so parentified as a child, and I was really over responsible, and I felt like I didn't have the ability to see that like I could be with someone and help them in and like not lose myself in it.
Yeah.
So I would try really hard. That was part of the way that I coped. And so John says to me in like such a gentle and non-condescending way after I'm explaining kind of this dynamic. And he says, Aundi, what would it be like instead of trying so hard? What if you tried softer? And I just remember, like, even still, like, I just remember like this feeling of like a little stunned. Like, I'm like, wait, what? Like, and I think at that time, especially in a world, in a culture that praises people for working so hard, for burning themselves out, for hitting themselves against the wall, for harming themselves. I think especially like for women like to be like to sort of sacrifice yourself in these really specific relational ways, like all these things. The invitation was for me to not stop trying, but to try softer.
Yeah.
And so that really, there was a lot of other things that happened, but it began this process in me of wondering,
Mm.
what would that be like to do it differently? And in a way, that question got asked of me by John, even probably 6 years before I really had the resources to implement
Right.
what that would look like. And so I think in so many ways, that was part of the shift, was just becoming aware.
Yeah.
Like I am working so hard and it's leaving me in this place of harm and outside of my window of tolerance into a place of burnout. And so it's like all the other pieces, so much of the work that I talk about come from this place of what would I need?
Yeah.
What kind of resources, support, safety would I need to come from a place where I don't have to hurt myself
Mhm.
to feel this feeling, to be with this person, to turn towards the pain? And so all that to say, that's a long answer to that was a big shift for me, was someone co-regulating with me
Yeah.
and inviting me to see that there might be a different way.
Yeah. I think that long answer is necessary because it's indicative of how many steps and how many pieces of the puzzle exist that we have to collect as we start doing this work. And um, one of the things you said reminded me of, I think every client, I'm wondering if you can attest to this too. I think every client I've ever had at some point has said, I'm so tired of being told I'm so strong. And I deal
Mm,
directly with grief, right? So, of course, that is such a common response from someone who sees us grieving and long term says, "Oh my gosh, you're so strong. I can't imagine," and throws out all the statements of like centering themselves in the experience instead of allowing the griever to say, I am faking the strength. I'm trying so hard to look okay for you and everyone else that
mm, mm,
even the site needed to say, what would be different? How can I open and find some alignment in my nervous system, right? Some curiosity that lets me say, maybe there is a better way. Maybe there is a different path forward. So being able to give such language to it is really that pathway into, well, what kind of strength do I want to embody? Is it that bulldozer? Is it the one that builds the brick walls? Is it the one because someone who can carry 1,000 pounds, what are they doing that for? Is it because they're isolated and have no one else to carry it with them? Sometimes.
yeah,
Is it because
yeah.
they don't trust anyone? Sometimes. right? And so that's where I love how your second book comes in so beautifully about starting to learn, well, what is it that's causing you to feel that dysregulated, to feel outside of alignment with your values, with who you are, with that safety,
Mhm.
and get you into this place where you can then say, okay, well, even if I'm not entirely ready to
Mm,
be facing my stuff, um, yeah, that quick absorption of if I just gather all the information, then I'll heal. And it's
mm,
so untrue. So, um, how did your this is something I think is pretty common too. How did your nervous system, how did you see and notice things starting to shift in yourself instead of just being dysregulated and then shutting down and having to like pull back? What were some of the signs for you that you could tolerate that
mm,
dysregulation, that intensity, even when you're asking big questions, so that you could like, oh, okay, so that actually wasn't, I'm not at a 10 anymore. Even though I'm still stressed, I'm
mhm.
at a 6.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that so first, I love what you shared, and I'd love to talk even a little bit more about grief too, because I think
Yeah.
that this is such a huge part of all of this work. But I think oftentimes, I love sort of getting curious about sort of how our thinking helps us, like shows us maybe what nervous system state we might be in.
Mm.
And so I think that what I notice, I mean, there's multiple things. I think on a like a somatic level, I tend to notice just a little bit more of an openness and an ease in my body. Like my shoulders, I don't have to work so hard. I tend to carry a lot in my neck and shoulders. And so when I'm coming from a more regulated place, more grounded place, it's not like this constant feeling of, oh, I have to relax my shoulders, or or like my neck hurts so bad because I've been straining to show up in a really specific way. And now my body is exhausted from
Yeah.
straining. What I notice is that there is a sense of like almost anchoring in my body where it feels really a lot easier to come from a very like feels like almost a core strength. It's like the strength comes from a centered place
Mhm.
versus like a strained place. So somatically, that's something I often notice, and just like a sense of like there's more time. Whenever I'm sort of in a sympathetic nervous system state, there doesn't feel like there's ever enough time. And when I'm really stuck in sort of more of like that dorsal sort of dissociative, it feels like either there's so much to do and I can't get it done, or it's like, what's the point? It's never going to get done anyway. So just, you might as well quit. And so I definitely the shifts, so like there's connections, but I think from the more thinking place, what I notice is that my thoughts shift towards more like, yes, this is hard, and I do a lot of hard things.
Yeah.
Or yes, that is a challenge, and it would be okay if I worked on it today and tomorrow. Um, like, oh man, I really don't like disappointing people, but also like they're an adult and I think they're going to be okay. So I notice a lot of both and thinking when I'm coming from a more regulated place. I'm also a lot more able to connect with seeing my own like strength and resources, like remembering,
Mm.
oh, like I'm capable. Like I'm very capable of quite a few things. And that feels true and it feels real. Um, so I think I mean, I noticed it even then. And I think before, like probably 10 years ago, it wasn't so much that I noticed it automatically. It took some time. But it feels like that's a lot of times how shifts begin to happen. Is there like these little minute, like you're like, oh, adjust, adjust, adjust. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I was carrying this 50-pound weight and now I feel like I'm not. And
Yeah.
that's really interesting
Yeah.
that I'm feeling so much more able to just exist
Yeah.
without feeling so weighed down. But it's not to say I don't ever get dysregulated now. I certainly do, you know? So I'm still familiar with like when my body is going to those places. I just have a lot more language and understanding of like what's happening and not just what's happening, but then also like what is the resource I need or maybe not just the resource, but also like the support, like the person, who are the
Yeah.
people that make me feel that I can do this hard thing or face this difficult thing.
Yeah. I think the like first moment of recognition that both and is possible, or I'm going to someday potentially be more okay than I am right now, is not even as dramatic and exciting as we want it to be. It's as simple as I've survived a lot, period. Just recognizing not the and I'll be okay or wow, I've done a lot of things and I can just as simple as like, I'm still here. Okay.
Mm.
Like that moment is so sacred. And I think people glaze over that a lot because there's this pressure, whether it's internal or external, to perform or to heal faster or to expedite the process they're going through. And yet they've discounted their own, hey, you're still here. Of all the things you could be doing right now, you're here right now and you're actually thinking about your survival and your wellness. And that to me is that little like gentle nudge towards those inner parts that just have been waiting to be acknowledged. Like, I'm also still here. I'm also still capable. Don't leave me behind. Integrate me, like, invite me forward. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. Something you said about there's time for this made me think about what in my own grief journey I've been doing lately to remember there's time for all of the things that I need and want, no matter what, how extravagant and life giving or little and meaningful they are. And the way I started practicing it was getting back into baking bread.
Mm.
Literally this morning, I was rushing to get to this call because I had a loaf of bread that needed to go in, and my faithful husband is out there learning how to finish it in the oven for me. And then for some reason, I thought I have time to start a second loaf because I'm not in a hurry. I'm
Mm.
going to disappoint Aundi if I'm a minute late, which I wasn't because there's time for things, right? But I'm also
Mm.
not feeling like, what was I thinking? I was thinking this sounds joyful and that's what I want in my life. And I'm going to start a busy day with something really joyful. I started a second loaf. And I think the time that comes out of something is simple, not just making time to do the thing, but the object lessons within baking bread, right? You can't just sit down and do it. It's hours and hours of waiting
Mm.
and resting and learning to rise and learning to read the situation. And um, I'm curious, like, how in your life did you start deciding there's time for this? Because that's not something I often hear people articulate. I hear them say,
Yeah.
well, this week we'll do this and next week we'll do that. And I'm like, why is there a next week? Right?
Yeah.
Like, can we
Mm.
just exist here and now and stay
Yeah.
present for a moment?
Yeah. No, I think for me, I mean, certainly when I think about myself growing up, I went from my experience was just like everything was so rigid from like that's how I survived like a really chaotic home and lack of care and then there was like the other side that I think of too like where it's like a dissociation and things like that but often like if I was in a place where I was doing something it was from a place of a lot of strain it was everything I had it was all those things and so, in my own healing journey, which has included a lot of grief, not just from like complex trauma, but losing a parent who was like my main abuser, and the complexity of that, um, I think of it like time, like a kindness, like the sense of that there is not a rush to like have to be over it or feel it in a certain period of time or all those things there is a it's like a kindness to the parts of myself that are still hurting that are grieving And it feels to me like, um, I think that like one of the themes that I talk a lot about in my writing is compassion, and this idea of what does it look like to turn with compassion towards ourselves and offering. And I know this is not everybody's journey with grief, but I think even if you're grieving someone that you had a good relationship, just by living in a culture that requires us to pretend like we're over things or that we have to be stronger. Like I think of it like a certain kind of strength,
Yeah.
that which is something I unpack a lot in Strong Like Water, that there's this idea that not feeling is strong, which is ultimately like so deeply the opposite of what's really true.
Yeah.
Um, and so the enough time, it's almost like, hey, here's a gigantic container, fill it with whatever you want.
Yeah.
And that in doing that, there is an invitation to unfolding. And the more pain we carry, the more trauma, the more grief, the more we'll likely have to unfold. And it's so good to be able to have all the space you need to let it be as complex, to let it take the time that it takes, to let it get really messy, to allow it to be what it's going to be. And not to say that we don't, I'm a big advocate for things like pacing yourself and things like learning resources to sort of have choices in your journey so that you feel like it's not, in so many ways, trauma like takes away your choice. So I love helping people to understand where they do have agency so that they can be sort of change the posture from it's happening to me to the sort of like, what are my choices within this thing?
Yes.
So it regains some of that agency, even though we can't change the reality of what's happened. Um, and so all of that, for me in my life has been really granular. Like it's like I think this internal posture of like things like poetry,
Mm.
instead of feeling like, oh man, you have to read this whole long book on whatever. Not that that's bad, but like if my nervous system's like, I'm exhausted, my body's like, I'm exhausted and I'm done, I can't really carry anything else.
Yeah.
And then I just read a piece of poetry that's like says more than 10,000 words could say.
Yeah.
Like to me, that feels like like there's enough time. Like it just feels like it's okay. The thing that you thought you needed may not be the thing you need.
Yeah.
It may be the attention to the ways that our body are saying, I'm already carrying too much. Please make enough space for that. And I think there are so many different ways to make that space, whether that's making bread or it's just being with someone who is like allows you to be in what you're feeling, or looking at a piece of art, or being outside without technology and just literally hearing the birds chirping. Like there are so many ways for us to make the space, but I think we're socialized to think that is unproductive, and that we are, wasting our time, and that we're behind, and that we're all these things. And the paradox is that when we learn to be with,
Mhm.
for however long that takes, like that is so often the kindness that is needed for that pain to begin to metabolize at whatever pace it needs to.
Aundi, I didn't ask you to read my mail this month, but apparently you have. It's funny because I was just reflecting on it's been 7 years since my mom died, and January is historically the worst month for me anyway. That's the month she died. In 2020, I had a miscarriage. I was being slandered. I was having a
Mm.
job loss situation. There was so much going on. So January is always so loaded. Plus, it's the pressure of everything you just talked about, plus improve yourself, be better, do more, exist bigger. Um, and I love a good challenge, but January has been an embodied challenge for me for years. So this month I was very like, okay, well, I want to move tenderly and very intentionally through each day of January. And on the day itself of her anniversary is 2 days before my grandfather's death anniversary. So there's a lot going on. And I thought, let me just see what I can be this month instead of what I can do. The escapism was 20 novels this month.
Mm.
I got to
Mm.
the end of one this last week that wrecked me. Like I
Mm.
loved the characters. I loved the story. I wanted everything beautiful for them. And it's part of a series. And so it was a cliffhanger. And I'm like, I am unwell. Oh, you know what? I just escaped for a month. Not like I was present for a lot of it, but I read really fast.
Mm.
And at the same time, all of this continuing education I'm trying to get done before April is on the back of my mind. And I just thought, well, I could go now that I've finished that novel and I need to stop and like just love the characters for a minute. I could go and work
Mhm.
on my CE. Let me go jump into some observations of somatics. And instead, I did exactly what you just said. I was like, no, that's actually too much. Let me go pick up this poetry book. I read like one or two and I thought, okay, that's not quite it. I then turned on some music and I just released everything. Like this sob came
Mm.
out of me. And I thought, okay, there is time for
Mm.
me to just stop learning and stop flooding my brain with even stories that are fun
Mhm.
and come to this place of remembering I can pace myself to my own standard. I don't have, even if I do have someone saying, when will you be done? What's your, like, when
Yeah.
can I expect our lives to go back to normal? Even if I had that person, it's not about them. That's their own dysregulation showing up and not being able to make space for me. And so I appreciate you saying all of that because I can say it to myself, but I feel like other people saying the same exact thing is really, really crucial, right? Like we were talking
Mhm.
earlier, this conversation is becoming more widespread because there's this collective understanding that we've tried talk therapy in isolation for so long. And now we are recognizing this is my interpretation of it, the value of the collective wellness by settling into the impact of our bodies and how they
Mm.
are impacted by grief and how we relate to other people through our bodies. It's why nonverbal communication is so significant, right? When we
Yeah.
haven't been given good experience of attunement with others, we misread and then we go back into isolation. So, um,
Yeah.
you wanted to go back and talk about grief. So let's do it. I've got a million directions we could go. What what is your thought on how someone can begin
Mm.
to soften into their grief when their experience has been such a cognitive process? Like
Mm.
we, I break things down and say like body, mind, heart, and spirit. It's all part of the whole. You can isolate them if you want to, but you've done that for a while and it hasn't worked. How can you begin to pull people back in? Like, where would you, who someone comes in and says, like, I'm in this stage of the grief process, but okay, that's cute. Um, it's not, it's not holistic enough to say where you're actually starting.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, I think the first thing that I would say, and this is probably something you already talk about, but I think it's just something I like to start with is saying, grief is just such a natural part of being human.
Yeah.
Like grief is not something that we fix.
Right.
Grief is part of the process required
Yeah.
to be able to metabolize pain.
Yeah.
And any pain to some extent requires there's a certain level of grief that comes. And so I think that I say that because I think sometimes people, especially in our culture, I think grief can be thought of as the problem.
Right.
And I would say that grief is really, I mean, this is taken from other folks, not taken, but sort of riffing off of other quotes, but just like grief is sort of the imprint of love or those things that we were meant for love,
Right.
right? So, like in my case, having a parent who was an abuser, part of my grief has been what not only did happen, what didn't, but what didn't
Yeah.
happen in my life. And both sides of those, to some extent, are actually about love because I was worthy of that love and I didn't get it.
Yep.
And that's worthy of grief. And then the way I was harmed is also worthy of the grief, right? But what's so tricky, depending on our experiences, is that one, we live in a culture that doesn't really really socializes people not to grieve, right? We are sort of praised when we don't grieve. We are looked at as quote unquote strong. We are seen as being tougher. There are sort of these like social belonging pieces that, whether people are conscious of it or not, almost everyone has internalized.
Yeah.
And so the problem with that is, even if the grief is not necessarily has not necessarily been a traumatic grief, um, if we don't feel like it's okay to grieve, it's almost like the process that needs to happen gets frozen. And when it gets frozen, I think one of the ways we might cope with that is by going cognitive, right? Like just like what you're saying. So we're thinking about the feelings, we're not feeling the feelings.
Yeah.
And that, again, that's sometimes a way that people adapt, because when we've been taught that feelings are bad or that you won't be able to handle it, or you've never been supported in feeling your feelings, um, intuitively and sort of even subconsciously, that will feel dangerous to us
Mhm.
to be able to get into the work needed that may be required for there to be that processing. And so I think often, partly is I would encourage folks to be curious about their story and like what they've learned about feeling and learned about grief. Because I think sometimes if you're a person who, like, let's say you grew up in a family and you've never were allowed to feel and it was sort of shamed to feel, it makes so much sense that grief would feel like this black hole that you'll never, like, you know what I mean? Like it feels like, where do I even begin? And I think that's where it's sort of helpful to begin by, not that we it's not that we can control grief, or it's not that we can like sort of make it like this bite-sized thing. Like sometimes grief is sort of its own animal too, so I like acknowledge that, but I think that there are ways that we can begin to find, like, to get curious about where and when do we feel safe enough to access some emotion. What people cause us to feel, I love that you use the language of softening into the grief. What would it be like to give yourself permission to be with it, even just for a little while?
Yeah.
Like what if that was an experiment, like an experiment
Yeah.
almost, to begin to just to see. Because I think so often that the truth is that that feels really intimidating,
Yeah.
to dive into the deep end when you're like, listen, nobody taught me how to swim.
Yeah.
And you want me to dive into the deep end? Like, somebody give me a floaty or something,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
anything. And so I think that, learning about grief as like, that it's normal,
Mhm.
it's part of the human condition. It's not, there's no pathology to grief. In fact, I love the quote by Dr. Gabor Mate, talks about like, in many ways, the opposite of trauma is genuine grieving.
Mm.
So often in the work I do in trauma work, we are actually trying to get to the point where someone is able to feel safe enough working through the trauma so they can grieve.
Yeah.
And so it's not to say that the grieving is it's not that it's easy, but there is something in our bodies where we are designed. Like there is important medicine
Yeah.
in the process of the grief.
Yeah.
And when we don't get to access the medicine, it's not to say that that will ever be easy, but there's something there that we really need.
Yeah. That's something that brought to mind just now. I have to tell people kind of similar to what you just said when they sit down or even when they're just listening, the idea that all trauma has grief, but not all grief has trauma. Like it's so natural to grieve. It's the other side of life. Like I like to say it's two sides of the same coin, grief and life. They're there. You'll flip back and forth, I promise. Um, how do you empower yourself to be confident when the coin flips? You are not necessarily going to stay in that place forever.
Mm,
You will learn in whether it's isolation or in relationship how to close the box again.
mm,
And the empowerment comes from recognizing you have autonomy to decide when the lid comes off the box. and when it goes
Mhm.
back on. I was talking with someone yesterday who, as they were speaking, said, "You're taking the box and you're taking the lid off." And I was
Mm.
like, "Okay, I don't have to. This is just me asking questions. So if it's too much, put the lid back on." Literally visualize yourself taking the box from my hands and putting the lid on it, because I'm not the one that chooses when we start to wade into these things that you've kept hidden away. That's all up to you. And that approach of, I love the scientific mind experiment language. I say it all the time. It's so helpful because it allows us to like almost become playful, right? When we were kids and we wanted to learn how to make a pie, we started with mud in the
Mhm.
backyard. We experimented with little things that changed the way we perceived the world around us. And I think that that's one of the power pieces in grief work that we can obtain, is this willingness to explore what is actually possible for us to be, who we can become, without just saying, well, we've survived all of these things and so now we're strong people. Well, maybe. We're strong, like you said, and I'd love for you to break this down too. Like, we're strong in certain ways, but what does true strength look like? And is it something that is this individualized? I mean, to some degree, yeah, of course it is. But are there markers that we as individuals can be looking for that show us we've moved from that tight muscle, um, tension based strength into a true strength that allows that sense of self to really begin to
Mm.
flourish?
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the things, so in Strong Like Water, part of what I wanted to do in that book is to really, I would say, expand our definition of strength.
Mm,
And the reason I say it like that is because, so part of my own story is I've always sort of been viewed as the strong one. I've always been like the person that people don't worry about, or that could get things done, or was such a hard worker, or was the good kid, or all these things. And what was so painful about that is that at the same time some of those things were praised, it meant that the pain that needed attending
mhm,
could never get the attention because it was so guarded, and necessarily so. Like, it needed to be that way for me to be able to survive my childhood. So it's like there's the both ands. And so in Strong Like Water, what I explore is that I talk about it through the lens of what I call the flow of strength. And I sort of define three types of strength. And the first one is what I call situational strength. And situational strength is, I think of as a sort of a life or death energy. It's the energy, it's the kind of strength that most of us think about when we talk about strength, like exactly what you and I are saying. It's like showing up no matter what. It's whether that means dissociating, whether that means pushing yourself into total fight mode, flight mode, over accommodating. It's giving beyond your limits,
mm,
or doing anything beyond your limits, in part because, or sometimes in total because, we feel like there is a life or death threat. And that's based off of a perception too. Like, it may not look that way to other people, but if our body perceives the experience is life or death, in the sense of like, we will no longer belong, we won't have a home to go home to, whatever that means, there's lots of context dependent things. So a lot of people, in my opinion, live mostly out of situational strength when they're showing up in a way where they have to do something hard. It's not that situational strength is bad. Sometimes we need situational strength. Like, for me personally, I am deeply grateful for my situational strength. It allowed me to survive really difficult, hard things in
mhm,
my life. And what I also know is that our bodies are finite, and if like, it's not sustainable to live out of situational strength. That kind of, I think of it like a high octane fuel. And
mhm,
it's the kind where you only have so much. So it's sort of like, if you're having to live that way in your everyday life,
mhm,
you are going to go into the negative, sort of, like your body is going to feel the impact of that harm. However, I think when our body, along that flow of strength, when we begin to have enough I call them compassionate resources, but really what is meant by that is that when our body has enough cues of safety and support, we neurobiologically, our neuroception, um, picks up that there's enough safety that we begin to move into sort of more of our nervous system. Like, for example, our prefrontal cortex begins to come online.
Yeah.
And when that happens, we are able to have more of that both and kind of thinking. We're able to begin to have a little bit more of higher level sort of thought and resourcing within our own body. And so instead of being like, I am my pain,
Mm.
we might feel like I am experiencing pain and I am myself. Like I am aware
Yeah.
that this is painful. And also I have other choices. And that shift sounds small, but it's huge,
It's,
right?
I mean, the prefrontal cortex part alone isn't like 25 years old before it's fully developed in people. Like
Yeah, it may
that,
even be like 27. It's
yeah,
like, yeah, it's totally.
that's why it's such
And
a big deal.
and when it's offline, it's very significant
Mm.
because essentially we are fully living from our survival brain. And the more harm that survival brain is carrying, the unresolved pain and trauma and grief,
Yeah.
the more like sort of at the surface that will be.
Yeah.
So when that prefrontal cortex is offline, that situational strength can come out in a lot of different ways, sometimes in ways that are really out of alignment with how we want to live,
Yeah.
which can be really tricky, you know?
Yeah.
So I call that center place in the flow of strength. I call that transitional strength.
Mhm.
And it's like this place where we're beginning to learn to be with our pain. It's like we're able to attend to our pain. We have a little bit more choice because we are not over identified with the pain. And then I would say, as we move along that flow of strength and as we gain, sort of more resources and more support, I think intuitively our body begins to be able to process some of whatever is causing us to have some activation. And as we metabolize that, we move towards an integrated strength. And so that's the furthest along that flow of strength. And I think of this like, you could, for some people, you could be in situational strength, transitional strength, and integrated strength within 20 minutes,
Yeah.
because this in many ways to me is the spectrum of being human. Ultimately, I think this is what it means to process pain.
Yeah.
And it's really meant to be fluid. What happens for a lot of people is that they don't have the resources and safety they need, and they get stuck in situational strength, and their body carries that pain, and there's a very high cost to being stuck there. And so, with that integrated strength, I think one of the things that's really beautiful is like it's almost like we begin to internalize what it feels like to move through pain, to grieve. And it's sort of like this upward spiral too,
Yeah.
where
Yep.
once, like, let's say you process one thing and you intuitively begin to know, like, that's what it feels like when I process something. And now when you go back, whenever you get back on that spectrum and there's activation, your body carries that resource now.
Yep.
And what's cool is that that is something that will likely end up supporting you in the future because you know that you can process pain. And so I love this picture of it. And to me, this is what I would call this really expansive version of strength. And it's not that I actually don't think that any one of these strengths are the best strength. I think ultimately it's more about, is the strength a match
Mm.
for what we are experiencing? So if we are in a life or death situation, honestly, some situational strength is likely really important.
Yeah.
Um, but when we are with like people that love us and care about us, situational strength may be a profound mismatch for what we're needing. And so it's been a fun idea to sort of unpack and talk about because I think that um, one of my deep hopes is to give language and really to give honor
Mm.
to people who've survived really hard things, to give trauma survivors honor and to say, you know what, your body is not trying to like be difficult. Your body is trying to help you survive.
Yeah.
And there is a difference.
Mm.
And when we can gain that, even if it's sometimes we aren't able to access compassion right away, but like if we can even gain respect for all the ways our bodies are constantly adapting and working to keep us safe, it can be a really beautiful starting place to sort of reimagine what we experience in our bodies as we grieve, as we process pain, as we process trauma.
Yeah. I like to tell people, hey, at some point you decided that your body and your humanity wasn't worthy of dignity anymore. And today we're going to agree the opposite. We're going to restore your belief in your own dignity
Mm.
because that's it, right? When we are so accustomed to being dismissed or abused or left behind or even just discredited in our experience of ourselves, like we have these aha moments and someone's like, that's ridiculous, that dignity that we inherently have as humans and as individuals is just chipped away at. And I think that when we reflect on, oh, I am deserving of dignity, then yeah, my anger makes a lot of sense. Yeah,
Mm.
this hyper vigilant response when people are just trying to get to know me and I tell them to, you know, walk away or I yell at them and like that starts to make a lot more sense and I can soften into a more curious place because like as parents we try really hard to be curious about our kids, especially if we've survived things. We try to not traumatize further and pass it along,
Mhm.
but because we are still learning how to move out of hypervigilance and how to stop self-protecting against non-threats, right, that invitation into just acknowledgement of our of validity as a human being and that worthiness we have. Yeah, I feel like that's like this little tugboat on your flow of strength. Like you can come further, you can come into this integrative space. It's going to be
Mhm.
okay. And when you step out of it, I love the idea of right, we'll spiral back to it. I've said that in the past because we feel like spiraling feels negative inherently, like the
Mm.
language, "Oh, I'm spiraling." Okay, but it's not a downward spiral. What if you're just back on familiar land and you've already been here before? So you literally have a map. Look at the map.
Mhm.
What does the map say? The map
Yeah.
says too much chaos. Okay, maybe sit down and stop trying to walk then. Maybe it's time to just rest in your
Yeah.
awareness that something is a little chaotic. But um,
Yeah.
Andi,
It's
you
beautiful.
have a guided workbook coming out soon with
Yay.
your Strong Like Water. Tell us about it because that's, I think, like the natural, perfect marriage to a book that allows us to open up, then move into what you
Yeah.
can do with it.
Well, yeah. Thank you for mentioning that. Yeah. I have, it's called Strong Like Water Guided Journey. It's coming out March 26th. And it is a companion book to Strong Like Water. And my goal with all of my work, but particularly with my companion books, is to really emphasize sort of experiential work because I so value um, experiential knowledge. That it's not that the cognitive knowledge doesn't matter, but in a way, it's like a way to practice this cognitive knowledge in a more embodied way. And so it's really a deepening of so much of even what we've talked about here. Of really, my goal in so many of these things is to sort of say, I hope that the reader feels this invitation to sort of like figure out, how do I make this work even more my own? How
Right.
do I attune it to my own experience so that it can be as helpful and as much of a resource as possible? So, and I also have some videos that go along with that. Folks can find that on my website. So I'm really excited about it. And I just really am passionate about people having the resources that they need.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited to get a copy of the journey book because I am not completed. I'm in process too, just like the rest of us. And I think it's really easy to lose sight of the people doing this work vocally and putting it out there in the world and putting them in a place where they also may not feel like, oh, cool. So I'm not allowed to be soft and have issues and
Mm,
also be
yeah.
still grieving. So I appreciate who you are and the work that you've created and the way that you have allowed your own story to not only metabolize, but to go out and create wholeness opportunities for other people. Because I mean, if we weren't doing this work, we would just be running around continuing to injure each other. And that's just not so
Yeah.
fun. It's just really not.
Yeah. No, I love that. And thank you for saying it. And yeah, it's really just the invitation to know like we are valuable as we are, not
Mm.
because we're finished.
Yep.
And I think that is just, one of those things that continue to come up that we, get socialized into believing that. And it's not the truth, that it really is the invitation because we are already so valuable and loved.
Yeah.
We get to do this work.
Yeah. Ah, so good. We could talk for hours. Thank you so much for being here. And I'm excited. I'm excited to see your new work and connect again soon.
Yes. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to episode 125 of Restorative Grief. This entire conversation is an invite into remembering your story and yourself and your humanity with kindness. What you have carried for your lifetime does not have to be brought for the future, but there is safety available to unpack and process both your traumas and the insight you deserve for the grief work too. I love Audi's last thought on how experiential grief and trauma work allow us to begin healing so differently. So if you're new to her work, I highly recommend both of her books and workbooks. You can also snag the podcast workbook for this month, which will include a few pages on what we discussed here today. The monthly companion workbooks I share are created for the same purpose, creating an experiential approach to the cognitive process of listening to a podcast. So if you've not tried one out, maybe this is a good time to do it. And if this is your first time listening to Restorative Grief, welcome. This year, we are chasing some big ideas and opportunities to create collective healing as well as individual healing. So I hope you'll subscribe to the show and stick around. If you like this episode, please leave a 5-star review and share it with a friend who may also need a reminder of how possible it is to heal. You know that feeling you get when someone sends you a little check-in and you're like, oh my gosh, they see me. That's what sharing an episode like this could do. So if that is something important to you, I am pretty sure it's important to other people too. And as always, one last thing before we go. Please remember, the only solution for grief is to do the work of grieving. Thank you for listening. I'll see you next week.